Hello, everyone down under. Your day is just starting and mine is just ending, but I'm so happy that it worked out that we have this little bit of overlap. And I wish I could be there with you in person. I wish I could just wiggle my nose and appear at the podium or sitting next to you, surprise. But even though I've been practicing Reiki for 29 years, I still can't do that. And I'm wondering, do you think there's something wrong with my Reiki practice? Do you think maybe I'm not doing it right or I need to take another course? Surely somebody has invented a Reiki course for teleportation. Do you know of one that I could take in a hurry? You know I'm joking, right? I always feel like when I'm somewhere outside of the Big Apple, as we call New York, that I should start with a blanket apology, both for my sense of humor and for my frankness. But we're here to talk about the future of Reiki, right? This is kind of like a big family meeting. And I'm so grateful to ARC, to the team of John, Hillary, Tony, and everybody else, and to Ryan, the tech team at the hotel there, that we're able to come together and that I can be part of this discussion because I love this topic, the future of Reiki. You know, I think about it all the time. Every choice I make, every class I give, it's always looking to see where is this taking Reiki practice. And so actually, although, well, I decided to title the talk today only because I think that John is right that this topic will be challenging, that it will be exciting, and that people will have a lot of inspiration to share. And I think that it also will give us lots of opportunities to practice our precepts. So today only being present, being mindful, and respectful of one another. And although we have called this conference the future of Reiki, I think that it's really the future of Reiki practice. Because Reiki, whatever it is, and I don't know what it is, and I personally don't think of it as an energy. It seems to me to be something much more subtle than that. Maybe consciousness. Something that words can only point to. But whatever Reiki itself is, I don't think it's worried about its future. I think it must exist beyond time and space and be that cradle in which everything that we know and all that is exists. I think that it's really Reiki practice that we want to think about. How will we bring this forward into the world in 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years, in 500 years? I wonder, will Reiki practice be available? And if there is something called Reiki practice that is available, will it resemble the practice that I have? I'm a Takata master. My practice is very simple. Now I'm practicing Reiki, and now I'm not. So simple, and that suits me. And I think it's appropriate to share my perspective since we're in an expanded room with so many different and equally valuable perspectives, but just so that you know where I'm coming from. And where I'm coming from is that although I hate to think of myself as being predictable, it really riles me. When it comes to Reiki practice, I am very predictable. And those of you who have sat with me before know what I'm going to do next. I'm going to ask you to place your hands. I know you did a meditation not too long ago, but let's just take another minute so that We can practice together. Place your hands on your heart, please, or as you prefer. Close your eyes. I'll watch the clock so you don't have to. And let yourself enjoy your practice and drop as deeply into yourself as happens in the next few moments. Please keep your eyes closed just a little longer, but you can relax your hands to your lap or wherever they're comfortable, and bring your awareness to your breath. Notice if anything has changed about your breath. And then notice how you're feeling. Any little difference between the way you felt when you placed hands and the way you feel now. And then, because we never know how deeply our awareness may have dropped within, just check in with your body. See that your awareness has become present in your body and aware of the room around you. Because it's never a good thing to open our eyes too quickly. And even a few moments of Reiki practice, as you know, your nervous system can become very quiet. And to open your eyes in a bright room is jolting to the nervous system and to who knows what else. So take your time, but when you're ready, let your eyes gently open. The art team has been planning this conference for so long. I can't imagine what it feels like to be Hillary, Tony, John, and their cohorts. I mean, it's been in the works for so long that I actually had it on my calendar for last year. And I was feverishly trying to figure out how I was going to connect with Sydney while I was in Paris. And Hillary, thank you for being so patient with me and letting me know I was going to be a year early. It's the first time for me. So in 50 or 100 years, will there be Reiki practice? Will Reiki practice as it exists then resemble the way that you practice? Will my grandchildren and their grandchildren be allowed to practice the way I do? Or will there be some kind of legal regulations? Today only, this is the time for us to think about this, to talk about it, each of us to share our unique perspective, because no one sees the whole picture. And as we listen to one another, we can get a broader understanding of the ramifications of our choices, so that we can make the best possible choice in the moment, because there's no formula for what we do, is there? There's very little precedent. The world is changing so fast, and what it means Reiki can seem to be changing really fast. It's important for us to come together and listen to each other. And I wish that I were able to hear more of the presentations But for now, I would like to talk about finding common ground. How can we find shared values? Because as we find shared values, then we can find what we can support in one another's practice and perspective. And Corey, my assistant, is doing the slides. There it is. So if that circle, if that orb is the Reiki community, the broadest Reiki community, then as we look at it more closely, we see that it's not quite that defined, that there are different elements in the Reiki community, and there's two that look very different, and then there's another, and then there's another, and of course there are so many more, but just to keep the slide so that we can make some sense of it. But you see the part where all of the circles interact, where they overlap. Those are our shared values. And if we can come to an awareness of that, then we can move from that. You know, I know that a big reason why I have been so successful in conventional medicine, and you know, when I was first brought into medicine, it was in the 1990s, and back then there were only two kinds of doctors. There were the real doctors and there were the witch doctors. And it was very clear to me which one I was in that world. And yet, the doctors trusted me because they saw that I shared their values. Not all of their values, but enough that we could work together. What values did we share? First, do no harm. Surely that's a value that we share also. We have our precepts. Be kind to others. It's the same thing, isn't it? And so, we want to remember that as we explore this area, because the discussion of values can be really igniting. And I hope that we have a very exciting discussion and debate. And I also hope that nobody's feelings get hurt. You know, we need to be able to have frank discussions about what our values are. And as I share my values in the next little while, please understand that I'm not saying these are the right values. There aren't right and wrong values, perhaps beyond first do no harm. But as a political activist said to me when I was in college, he who stands for nothing falls for everything. And so there's a point at which we need to be able to articulate our values, or else we don't know what's the compass that we can use to make a decision in the moment. Right? Ethics is often part of that discussion, and ethics is something that I think is just not talked about enough in the Reiki community, especially because although we are custodians of a spiritual practice, and I say that with confidence because our practice has been handed down through an initiation lineage, and that is a hallmark of spiritual practice. And all spiritual practice has healing benefits. That's nothing new. And doctors and nurses are very, very aware of that. They're also aware that patients who have spiritual support, patients who have inner resources, are patients who have better medical outcomes. So if we could be upfront about admitting that we are custodians of a spiritual practice, for example, it would really open up a lot of space for conversations that get stifled when we lead with our beliefs, with our worldview, rather than with our values. Peter Ustinov once said, "Beliefs divide people, doubt unites them." Beliefs divide people or separate people. Doubt unites them. And we may think that it's just doctors who doubt. You know, doctors have to be skeptical. It's their job to be skeptical. They make life and death decisions, and they need to be able to see some evidence. But we're just as skeptical as doctors in our own way, aren't we? When was the last time you watched an infomercial? Or for those of you who have young children, how do you support your children in being able to withstand the onslaught of TV commercials that are offering your kids all kinds of things you don't want them to have, or at least you don't want them to have all of them, maybe one piece of candy, but not 14 different kinds in an hour. So when we watch advertising, our doubt comes up, right? Our skepticism. We know that that person on the screen is just trying to take our money and doesn't really care at all about our well-being. And what we often don't consider is that when we speak about Reiki practice, the person who's listening to us is looking at us the same way we're looking at the people on the television screen trying to sell us something. Because to us, our Reiki practice is sacred. But to the person that we're talking to, it's our product. And of course, we think it's the best thing in the world. So if we lead with beliefs, not only are we separating ourselves from one another, but we're also separating ourselves from people that we could be helping. And one of the best ways to make sure that Reiki practice survives into the next millennia is through what I think of as sacred business. Reiki practitioners who are professionals, how many professionals do we have in the room? Would you put your hand up? I can see the room. Kind of. Somebody help me out here. Is it half the room, a third of the room? Ryan? Okay.
Pamela, it would be about half.
About half, okay. That's pretty much what I expected. My guess is that some of the other people are maybe considering becoming a Reiki professional. And maybe the rest of you sometimes go to a Reiki professional. So there's enough experience of business in the room that everybody can appreciate that those of us who are professionals, who get paid for the time and the setting and all that goes into us offering our Reiki services, whether it's treatment or classes, that the business that enables us to do that is the bridge between our practice and the world as it is today. So that business has to be of the world, and yet because it's the vehicle for spiritual practice, it's especially important that it be ethical and that it be in alignment with our own practice and our own values. And so again, if we had some discussion about what our values are, it would make a huge difference. For example, for me, I say that I'm a Takata master. And I know that my colleagues say that they practice Usui Shiki Ryoho. But to my understanding, only the Gakkai practice Usui Shiki Ryoho. And Hayashi's lineage practices Hayashi Shiki Ryoho, and Takada's lineage practices Takada Shiki Ryoho. And I'm only sharing those three because those are the three that I am most familiar with. I don't mean to be saying that those are the three that are important. Be careful not to read any subtext because remember, I'm a New Yorker and I'm very frank. So I am a Takada master. I practice Takada Shiki Ryoho, and I probably just got myself in a lot of trouble with some of my colleagues. But I feel very strongly about truth in advertising. I feel very strongly about letting people know what they're getting. So I let people know what they can expect to happen, what our interaction will be like when they come for a class, what our interaction will be like if they come for a healing session. And I pay attention to the quality of our communication because words are an important part of business and interact with the world. And words, as we know, are inadequate to express Reiki, whatever that reality is. But they're not inadequate to describe a Reiki treatment. They're not inadequate to describe how you felt when you finished your brief practice before. And so if, when people ask about Reiki, you were to lead with something they could relate to rather than a definition, that is really a belief to people outside of our worldview, right? We may think it's so obvious that of course it's real, but what happens when people are looking at something new? They're like we are when we watch the advertising on the TV, right? They're skeptical. They're looking for facts. They're looking for things that are relatable. And when we start talking in language that is either jargon or that is a belief system, like a belief in a subtle reality, we lose a lot of people who could really use our help. And I realize that for some people that's just fine. You know, we all have to decide who is the public that we want to help. And that's a very important business decision because, you know, if you try to be all things to all people, you wind up being nobody to no one. But if you think very clearly about who are the people that I work well with, like I work well with doctors and nurses, and what are their characteristics? Well, they're skeptical, and I'm skeptical. And I know that's why we got along so well. That's why I was able to be accepted into, you know, the operating room or theater in like the inner sanctum of medicine. And for an outsider to be welcomed into the operating room, even if it's by Mehmet Oz, it's not something that happens easily. So shared values, the perception of shared value. Who are the people that you want to work with? And what are their values? If you want to work with parents, for example, a value to address would be safety, right? Because parents are concerned about the safety of their children. And so again, if you were to lead with Reiki is always safe, Reiki can never do any harm, how does that sound to a parent who has a sick child or a child who's having problems in school and the parent trying to find help to balance this child so the child can be healthier and happier, but is concerned because he or she can't quite get a handle on this Reiki thing. And we don't help when we lead with beliefs. But we can lead with stories. We can lead with personal experience. As long as we tell it in a way that is engaging, as long as we stay connected to the person we're talking to, because relationship is our primary way of getting people's attention and keeping their attention. Right? And as long as we tell stories that are relevant to that person, because people are interested in themselves and their own well-being. So when somebody asks you, a potential client or student asks about Reiki, the smartest thing you can do is to find out why the person wants to know. Well, there's so many ways I can talk about Reiki practice. I'd love to help you out with this, but tell me, what do you have in mind? If that person's mother is dying of cancer and is in pain, that's one conversation. I'm sure many people have a lot of stories that you could share about how Reiki practice has helped someone in that situation. If we go back to the parent with a child with ADHD who is acting up at school, that's a different conversation. Or if it's a teenager who has epilepsy, that's a different conversation. So the more we know about the person who is interested, or the group of people, if we're speaking to a group, the more we know about them and their concerns, the more we can address that, both in terms of talking to them about the benefits, how Reiki practice can help them, and also, and this is so important, addressing anything that might be frightening to them. For example, some people get Reiki and Rolfing confused. And if you know what Rolfing is, I mean, it's the polar opposite of Reiki practice. I've gone through the Rolfing series many years ago, and it was very valuable. And it was also one of the most painful therapeutic experiences I've ever had. Whereas Reiki practice, we just lightly place our hands or we hover over the body. Right? So if the person has a concern about pain, or you think they might, or just routinely, to mention that it's a gentle experience. Right? We don't know what that person has already heard about Reiki practice. And so it's really helpful to lead with the diversity in our practice. You know, our practice is so diverse that we don't even have an agreed upon definition of Reiki practice. You know, if you go to a restaurant and you order risotto, it might have courgettes in it, it might have mushrooms in it, it might have basil in it, it might have cheese in it, but it's always going to have rice in it. But what can we say about Reiki practice? There's nothing that it always has in it. There are people who consider themselves to be Reiki practitioners or Reiki masters who have self-initiated. And they say that Usui Sensei didn't have a Reiki master, so why should they have a Reiki master? And they don't think about the fact, it seems this is a fact, I'm always hesitant to say historical facts because we really don't know that much about our history. But it does seem that Usui was a profound spiritual seeker. He was a family man and a lifelong seeker. And maybe if somebody is a lifelong seeker, they could have an amazing spiritual experience. I mean, certainly Usui wasn't the only one, but he happened to call his practice Reiki. And yes, I know that the word or the term, because Japanese language doesn't exactly have words, but the pictogram Reiki was used for other practices at Usui's time. But now, almost 100 years later, outside of Japan, the term Reiki is mostly thought to refer to a practice that is based in Usui's practice. Even if it's been modified, even if it's morphed over the years, whether it's morphed in the natural way that spiritual practices morph because they are passed from teacher to student who becomes a teacher and passes it to another student who becomes a teacher. And in that way, the practice and the lineage stays alive and relevant very organically in each time, in each generation, or whether it's changed because people arbitrarily decided to change it. And at what point is the practice changed and no longer Reiki practice? These are questions. These are questions we need to consider. And there is no right or wrong answer. For me, I'm quite content to keep Reiki connected to Usui. I like that. I wish that if people have other practices, that they would name them something else. But until we have that agreement, and I'm not holding my breath that that's going to happen, until we have that agreement, what if we were just more upfront about describing our particular approach to practice, about acknowledging the marvelous, unending, scintillating diversity of Reiki practice that is available in the world today? And if we can do that, celebrating the practice and the diversity, the plurality of practice, instead of somehow having a snide remark about it, or somehow feeling less than. You know, the world is full of different kinds of people. I'm sure even looking around the room, you'll see great diversity. And we're all Reiki practitioners. So why would we want to have only one Reiki practice? That doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to me anyway. I shouldn't say it doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to me because I want, as I'm told Mrs. Takata did, I didn't study with her directly, but I have many friends who did, and I grill them. And I'm told that Mrs. Takata said she wanted Reiki practice to be as common as aspirin. Imagine that, a world in which people could reach for an aspirin, or they could reach for Reiki practice, or they could reach for other things. That there were more plurality, so that people would have more opportunity to reach for help from a source that they were comfortable with. And never do we act out our spiritual values as we do when we choose our health care. You know, faced with the well-being of our physical bodies or the bodies of the people we love, we find out what we think is real. And until we're faced with that, I don't know if there's a way to really know. We can talk about, well, this is what I would think about, but we never know until the situation comes up what we would do. I want to have lots of options. I want to be able to go to Memorial Sloan Kettering if I feel that that would be an important part of care. I want to be able to receive Reiki treatment. I want to be able to take my Chinese herbs. And I want to make sure that those options are available to other people. So, I once was naive enough. Yes, New Yorkers have their moments of naivete. To think, to imagine that daily hands-on self-Reiki practice would be a value shared by the Reiki community, or a large percentage of it. And I thought, wow, if we could just encourage people to practice hands-on every day, because what I see is that many Reiki practitioners are not taught practice. And they don't practice in their training. I mean in-person training, not just people who are trained online. And I thought, well, if we could just celebrate our self-practice and share that value, and maybe we would encourage other people. And in fact, that's something that I have. I'm often told by Reiki practitioners that they started practicing every day because of something I said or wrote, and that it's made a big difference for them. But imagine if this kind of caught fire and a lot of Reiki practitioners, all different kinds of Reiki practitioners, spent some Reiki time with themselves every day. Every single day. Like meditators, serious meditators sit every single day. And serious yoga practitioners get on that mat every single day. How would that change the future of Reiki practice? That's one thing that we can all do, and we can do without offending anybody. Maybe if you share the badge, that might offend somebody, but if you just practice at home and you don't tell anyone, that's certainly not offensive. So I found out that some people found this badge to be offensive. And, you know, it really surprised me. And they were colleagues of mine, people whose practice is very similar to mine, Takata masters, some close friends. And one colleague, an Australian, who was loath to tell me what she thought. I mean, I had to really put, because I want to know. I want to know different opinions. And finally, she said that I was dividing the Reiki community into people who practice self-Reiki and people who don't. And I thought, wow, I never thought of it that way. And then I remembered my friend, the political activist who later died as a result of his political activism. And I remember him saying to me when I was much younger and much more naive, he who stands falls for everything. So I decided daily self-Reiki practice is something I can stand for. And I really don't care how people practice. I'm not interested in the details of their practice. I mean, if they want to share it, I'm happy to hear it, but that's not the important part to me. What's important is that they do practice, and they practice every day. Because if we practice every day, well, I want to show you a visual that I thought of as I was looking through my photos. My iPhone is never far when I travel, and in Heathrow Airport there is a mosaic of Queen Elizabeth. And it looks something like that. It's very, very big. Maybe some of you have seen it. And then as you get in closer, Corey, and get in closer, and get in closer, do you see what's happening? Her face disappears and you see all these human beings, all different ages, all different colors. And it makes me think of our community, our global community, and how if we can band together, if we can find that shared value, maybe it's daily Reiki self-practice, maybe it's not. I'm open to suggestions. But if we can find that shared value and we can enact that, each of us, in our daily lives, we can create a mosaic that looks quite regal. Corey, would you go back to Queen Elizabeth, please? She does look quite beautiful there. So I think that we are really close to the question and response time. Is that correct, Tony?
Pamela? Yes. Yes, we are indeed. Thank you. Pamela, would you like me to ask now if there are any people in the room who'd like to ask you a question? Have a think about it, folks.
No, we can do that, and I have one thing I'd like to say
Sure
before
thing.
that. Since I've been focusing on our actions and choices as individuals, there are two checkpoints where I think of them as gauges for myself. And one is how I feel about diversity. You know, am I able to listen to someone's version of Reiki practice and not have my equanimity disturbed? And the other is hearing about other colleagues' success. So I think that if we use those check-in points as they are relevant to us, it can really, it helps me stay humble. It helps me see where there's still more practice to be done. Do we have questions?
Do we have anyone who'd like to ask a question? Can you stand up, please, and I'll just head down towards you very quickly.
Thanks for the beautiful talk, Pamela. My question is that, like we say, Reiki never harms, and I know there are different ways of doing Reiki and different ways of doing Reiki practice, but something that is concerning to me that I think as Reiki practitioners we should discuss it is, and during a Reiki healing session, whether we get any negativity released from the client or patients, and like I know the way, like clearing ourselves, but whether the whole concept is correct or not. If we say that we are connected to the source and probably we have some healing waves flowing through our hands to the person, so we are in some points stronger, or like the our electromagnetic field at some points stronger, so we should not really get any negativity. But I would like to have your opinion on this. And sorry, my other question is that from when we...
excuse me, could we do one question?
Yes.
And then we'll see about the other one, because that's a big question. And could you tell me your name, please?
Yeah, my name is Amelia.
Amelia.
Amelia, thank you. Thank you for bringing up safety again. And, I often say Reiki practice is safe, but is the practitioner safe? And safety, I mean, we could do a whole conference on safety. I think of it from a physiologic perspective. I don't have the same model for Reiki practice or the mechanism of action as you mentioned. And I also don't think in terms of negativity. So I'm really kind of having to translate here. But maybe if I share my perspective, you'll find something that is helpful to you. Because the way that you're talking about it is a very dualistic perspective. Negativity, positive energy, like this. And as long as we're in a perspective of dualism, we're in danger. It's a power struggle of some sort. But to my understanding, Reiki is a spiritual practice, and it's a non-dual spiritual practice, meaning that it takes us to that experience of oneness. Corey, we actually have a slide for this. We had some tech trouble with the slides, so I'm sorry you didn't get to see all of them, but sacredness, stillness, silence, oneness. Reiki practice on a physiologic level is balancing. And as we come into a more profound state of balance, we become more aware of these qualities. They're really just different ways of saying the same thing that cannot be said. When we are in that experience of oneness, and as a spiritual practice, Reiki, like all spiritual practices, has the goal of moving us along so that we can embody the experience of oneness, so that we can be that universal and express as the individual, that oneness and individuality. Isn't that what being on earth is about? That interplay to experience the oneness and be responsible as individuals. With that understanding, I can honestly say that I place my hands and I never fear. Mrs. Takata told her students that as long as you practice Reiki, you're safe. You don't pick anything up. And my understanding, and a lot of my understanding comes from 50 years of meditation and yoga practice. I lived in India for a couple of years in an ashram, did intensive practices, and that was long before I came upon Reiki. So by the time I learned to practice Reiki in 1986, I had been a student of meditation yoga for almost 25 years, and I actually was a meditation teacher. So this movement towards oneness, has been an important part of my life, and certainly that experience informed my understanding of Reiki practice. And that's the spiritual core of it. And if we're content to practice, which means we're not trying to do something to somebody, it's an offering. We place our hands, or we do whatever it is that we do as Reiki practice, and then what happens, happens. And the focus is on the person's response, right? So in my understanding, by the grace of the initiations, our hands carry a piece of information that we offer to another human being or an animal or ourselves, all of which are open information systems. And that system and our own system starts responding to that piece of information, which redirects our awareness to our own core, to our deepest spiritual oneness. that place where the universal and the individual overlap. And as long as we stay in that, as long as we have that understanding, and we're not trying to make something happen, and we're not afraid of an emotion that the person is having, and we don't want that person to think well of us, we're not performing, then we're safe, and the person is safe. Is that helpful, Amelia?
Thank you, Pamela, on behalf of Amelia. She says thank you very much, and thank you for taking her question and for sharing your insightful answer with us.
And you see on the screen, Team Reiki. This is my vision. I love sports. I don't like playing them so much. I'd rather play cards. But I love watching sports. And I love the idea of a team. And the way each team member has a unique job to do. And the team functions best when each team member does his or her job. And for us, in this expanded Reiki community, in this Team Reiki, the job that each of us has to do is just be ourselves. And maybe to practice self-Reiki every day so we can be and enjoy being the best version of ourselves. And in that way, we can enjoy one another's perspective. We can learn from one another. We don't have to agree with one another. There are people who might come to me, and if I didn't tell them that I only have my particular perspective on Reiki, they might think, oh my God. As one person accused me of having a broom up my root chakra. So, there are many other Reiki practitioners who might be a perfect match for that person, because I'm not real loosey-goosey. It's just not who I am. So, Team Reiki, all of us have the people that we serve. And fortunately, there are a lot of them. So we really don't have to step on one another's toes or on one another's hearts. Thank you so much. Thank you to the ARC team, to Tony and John and Hillary, and to all of you there, all of my colleagues. I honor you, and it's such a blessing for me to be with you, even in this tiny little way.
Beautifully said, Pamela. Thank you so much. Thank you.